From courtside of the virtual hardwood, it's the NLSC Podcast, a weekly show for basketball gamers and hardcore hoopheads. This is episode 584. I'm Andrew on our forum, Andrew NLSC on X and Blue Sky. I'm joined as always by my co-host Derek, DP3 in the forum, and DP3G and DP384 on X. Derek, we always call it down the middle on this show, but in the NBA, well, that's what we're here to talk about, so please, tip us off.
Yeah, so the hot topic around Game 4 of the NBA Finals had nothing to do with spectacular team or player performances and everything to do with the officiating. As a result, we will center this show around whether we think the NBA is rigged to some extent. So, Andrew, it's not a good sign when mayhem can be predicted by fans, former players, and media well before a game is played. When it was announced that Scott Foster, coined as, quote, the extender, end quote, on social media, was going to be part of the ref crew for Game 4 of the NBA Finals, it became the hottest topic in sports. And why is this the case? Because going back decades, Scott Foster has a sketchy track record when it comes to officiating in the playoffs, and commonly gets assigned to big playoff games when a series needs to swing a certain way. His past also includes his involvement with Tim Donaghy, who admittedly fixed games where he worked with gamblers and bettors, but he also stated that the league and other officials were involved. And before I dive into it, Andrew, I want to point out that this is sad. I think we can both agree.
Yeah.
We should be focused on the basketball.
Exactly.
The true competition. The discussion on social media and in households, etc., should be about great players and teams, excellent performances, and the awesome sport of basketball. And once again, like so many times in the past, this was not the case. I also want to point out, too, that the other hot topic related to Game 4 of the NBA Finals was Stephen A. Smith on his phone playing solitaire during the game. You know, he's paid millions of dollars to be there, all of that stuff. And there's, you know, images and video of his solitaire being up on his phone, you know, while the game is going on, during timeouts, all of that stuff. And that caused an uproar on social media. Former players talking about it, media, in turn, obviously, countless fans. And it's like, what is this guy being paid millions of dollars to do? He's not being paid millions of dollars to sit there and play solitaire during the NBA Finals, right? And this is going to be used for a while against Stephen A. Smith, as it should, to be like, listen, we don't like your takes. Your takes are trash, right? You cause so much drama, all of this stuff. We didn't respect you already. And now we're going to respect you even less because you're not even watching the games, right? No wonder your takes are terrible. You're on your phone, you know, playing solitaire half the time, et cetera. So those were the two biggest stories. Nothing to do with the players, nothing to do with the teams. It was those two stories that were the biggest. So before we dive into the whole, you know, if we think the NBA is rigged to some extent, yeah, doesn't that bother you?
It really does. And the Twitter account, the X account, and website Awful Announcing posted an article talking about how Stephen A. Smith and Kendrick Perkins have made themselves the stars of these NBA Finals with their antics and their terrible takes and their prominence on social media. And they shouldn't be the stars of the Finals. They are not active players. Kendrick Perkins at least was a professional player. I suppose you can give him that, but I don't give much credibility to his takes. So both he and Stephen A. Smith are cut from the same cloth. As far as analysts go, Awful Announcing indeed. They shouldn't be the stars of the NBA Finals. They shouldn't be the biggest story. It is ridiculous that Stephen A. Smith is not even paying attention to the game like that. I've seen a couple of people quip on social media that, well, it doesn't really matter, I suppose, because his takes are already decided and don't depend on anything that's happening in the game anyway. He's already deciding the narrative, so, you know, fair point. It shouldn't be that way, but yeah, you are absolutely right. Yeah, it's really a shame to see in a finals that the league and ESPN, ABC are not doing a great job of promoting anyway, as we talked about last week. They're making it feel like an afterthought because, oh, small market teams, who cares? This is going to be a low-rated finals. Let's not even pretend that it matters. There's that feeling which should not be the case with the NBA Finals, irrespective of who is in the NBA Finals. So yeah, not a fan of that at all. And of course, it is a shame that the officiating is also the hot topic as opposed to the basketball and the teams and the players that are playing and competing for the NBA championship. But, you look at some of the issues with officiating through the years, and Scott Foster, as we'll get into momentarily, but these are the kinds of things that the league needs to be focusing on. And not to get into too many other topics here, Derek, but when they're introducing things like new jerseys and new jersey nomenclature and the NBA Cup and changing all these rules and considering ideas like a 4-point line and changing up the All-Star format, none of that is necessary, but addressing these long-standing issues with officiating and controversies regarding referees, those are the things that Adam Silver and the league should be focusing on, not all that other stuff.
I agree. I also want to point out the Kendrick Perkins thing. Somebody made a comment on Twitter that is true in so many ways. The NHL for the Stanley Cup has the legend, possibly the greatest hockey player of all time, Wayne Gretzky, commenting on the games between quarters. And the NBA chooses Kendrick Perkins. Right? What are we doing? You're telling me that there isn't anybody else that can talk about these games? No great former players or coaches, no one with more knowledge of the game, nobody that is going to connect with the fans better. Like, why is Kendrick Perkins even out there? Why is he involved in NBA presentation? You know what I mean? Like, you go in NHL, you got Wayne Gretzky. And we're stuck with Kendrick Perkins. I can't even listen to Kendrick Perkins. He drives me absolutely nuts. And I agree with you about Stephen A. Smith and, other media personalities as well, these stupid debate shows. The talking points are already drawn up before that show even starts, before they even go on air. They've already chosen a side, right? They've already decided, hey, we're going to debate on this. I'm going to choose this side. You're going to choose that side, all of that stuff. It's so scripted. It's so much garbage. To be completely honest with you, I never watch any of it. Boy, am I glad. Unfortunately, being on social media, I have to hear sound bites every now and then and see it. It hits my timeline and whatnot. And it just reminds me of why I'm more at peace without watching this garbage. So before getting into our opinions on whether it's rigged or not, just something to note. The NBA is a massive business. And this is via AI overview on Google. Their most up-to-date numbers are, I believe, for the 23-24 season. The total league revenue reached $11.34 billion in the 2023-2024 season. This includes revenue from various sources such as ticket sales, broadcasting rights, and sponsorships. The league's valuation has also seen significant growth, with the average NBA team now worth around $4.66 billion. I want people to understand that the NBA is a huge business, and it's an entertainment business and an influence business, which is why when I posed this as a community question, I stated, with officiating being the NBA Finals hot topic, we want to know, do you believe the NBA is rigged? And these are the options I gave. Red, it's an entertainment business that is about profit and influence. It's rigged. Yellow, I don't know if it's rigged. Or green, it's not rigged at all. The players and teams decide the outcome. But it's very important to keep in mind whenever you think about this stuff, how big of a business the NBA is and how it's a business beyond basketball. It's about money and it's about influence, and that stuff absolutely matters in a major way. Think about how many people the social media accounts tied to the NBA reaches. Right? Think about everything people are looking at outside of the actual on-court basketball product. So one thing I also want to point out is there's an ESPN article written by Scott Eden, and it came out on, I believe, July 9th, 2020. And I recommend people reading it so they can see how deep the Tim Donaghy scandal was. So the article is called From the Archives, How Former Ref Tim Donaghy Conspired to Fix NBA Games. And it goes on to talk about, his collusion with bettors, the stuff he said to them, how he could swing a game 6 points either way, how his wife took to Donaghy's suspicious behavior, which I'm going to dive into a couple interesting parts from this article during this show, but I definitely recommend reading that article. It is a very long read, Andrew, but it's definitely worth it if you want to kind of learn more about the Tim Donaghy scandal, which, by the way, reared its ugly head again because of Scott Foster's involvement. And one thing I want to point out too, just an interesting stat, Scott Foster has officiated 1,675 regular season NBA games and 241 playoff games. This includes 24 NBA Finals games. He has been a staff official for 29 seasons, starting in the 94-95 season. So before I get into some of the, Scott Foster, Tim Donaghy connection and some other pieces, he's roughed a lot of games, Andrew. And I think that it would be closed-minded of somebody to not consider the fact that the NBA could have a bigger interest outside of true competition, right? Money, extending series, influence, all of that stuff.
Oh, for sure. And as far as my answer to the question, I suppose, I'm kind of in the yellow to green in so much as, do I think it's completely rigged? Do I think it's a complete work? Do I think it is as contrived and predetermined as professional wrestling, as WWE and AEW and all of the professional wrestling? Certainly not. Even if they are, I wouldn't say they're doing a particularly good job of it, or at least they're allowing a lot of teams to go rogue and spoil their plans, if you will. So I don't think it is completely rigged in that sense. However, as you say, the league does have an interest in certain results, certain markets being represented. It is a business at the end of the day. It is making a lot of money. So do they put a metaphorical hand on the scale? Do they influence the outcomes? Do they select referees? The extender, obviously, Scott Foster, when they do need to extend a series, when that would behoove them, when that would be a good move from a financial standpoint? Yeah, I think they certainly have and do that. Do you call that completely rigging it? Not the case of players throwing games or the action necessarily being predetermined and contrived, once again like professional wrestling, but you are influencing the outcomes to a certain extent. You are showing favoritism, and I certainly do believe there is favoritism towards the stars and the big markets and so on. So that is where I lean towards the influence, and you could call that rigging. Do I think it's a complete work like professional wrestling? No, but it certainly is influenced.
Yeah, I'm between red and yellow for this, and you'll see why, by the time we end this show. So really quick, the Tim Donaghy case. So it refers to the 2007 scandal where former NBA referee Tim Donaghy was caught betting on games he officiated and passing inside information to gamblers. This led to his guilty plea to 2 federal charges, a 15-month prison sentence, and a major scandal that shook the NBA. Now, one of the things is that people don't understand how long this was going on. Most people who haven't read about the case. So he admitted to betting on NBA games, including those that he officiated during the 03-04, 04-05, 05-06, and 06-07 seasons. He also admitted to passing inside information about player injuries, team strategies, and referee assignments to gamblers. And it was comments about other officials, like at the time, the head of officials, I believe, Ed T. Rush, Scott Foster, et cetera, that made me think that he wasn't a rogue. Like, it wasn't just Tim Donaghy and he wasn't acting alone, and that this was either a league-wide initiative or other officials conspired with Tim Donaghy and they were working together on the gambling. So according to court documents, Tim Donaghy placed 134 phone calls to Scott Foster between October 2006 and April 2007. These calls took place before and after games that Donaghy officiated and gambled on. The majority of these calls were brief, lasting less than 2 minutes. Now, why would those calls take place, right? Let's use common sense here. Why would the phone calls take place immediately before and after, be so short, and that many in that period of time on games that he gambled on? Just think about that common sense wise. Then it states, the calls were part of a period where Donaghy admitted to betting on games and passing game information to gamblers. He later pleaded guilty to felony charges related to these activities. During the same period, Foster and Donaghy also had 170 phone calls, according to the New York Times. Quote, "That's how we communicated in 2007, end quote," Foster told the New York Times. That is super sketchy. to be happening during that period of time, during the height of Tim Donaghy's gambling practices, betting on games he was officiating and whatnot. Tim Donaghy, in a somewhat recent interview, stated the league would come in, and if a team was up 2-0 or 3-0 in a series, they put the referees in the locker room. They would show us 15 or 20 plays that they wanted us to concentrate on during that night in the game. And those plays always went for the team that went down in the series and against the team that was up. So that is how they would manipulate the series. So it would be a 6 or 7 game series. He would go on to say, the league comes down and programs and trains the referees in these morning meetings of certain things they really want you to concentrate on in a given night. And it goes for the team that's down in the series and against the team that is up. And I heard about this as it relates to the 2006 NBA Finals, Andrew. Tim Donaghy did not ref that NBA Finals, but what he stated was the Mavericks got screwed in that series because the league held a meeting to state this is what you need to look at closer. And what they were having people look at were calls to, go against the Dallas Mavericks and for the Miami Heat. And if you remember correctly, Dallas went up 2-0 in that series, and then Miami won 4 games in a row, won that series in 6 games, and 3 of those games that they won were decided by 3 points or less. Game 3, June 13th, 98-96, Miami. Game 5, June 18th, 101-100, Miami. And Game 6, June 20th, 95-92, Miami. And if you remember correctly, a big part of the discussion back then was, why is Dwayne Wade shooting so many free throws? How is he getting to the line so much? These aren't real fouls. What is happening, etc. So it's hard to not believe what Tim Donaghy is saying here, right? It's hard not to believe that it's more league direction as opposed to just one rogue official, right? And there's been questionable series. I would say probably, especially since the early 2000s, there's been many questionable playoff series and finals outcomes and finals games, et cetera, where, we were left scratching our head, be like, wow, it really feels like the officials are taking control of this game. So, yeah, I don't blame people for being up in arms about the Scott Foster situation, about the Game 4 assignment, about, he called the most fouls during that game. He seemed to take control of the game in the fourth quarter. They were allowing Lou Dort to literally push players like full 2 arms extended in order to get steals to run the break. I was watching some of the footage of it. They were letting Caruso put his hands all over the Indiana Pacers. And, that happened a little bit during the Nuggets series as well. But the blatant push-offs constantly by SGA with his off arm and no calls, he's traveling and they're not calling it, all of that stuff. I mean, do you blame people for questioning this? No. Like when officials step in, when it looks like officials step in and are taking over a game and there's all of these long pauses and all of these questionable calls, as a fan base that loves sport, as a fan base that wants to watch true competition, how do you not get up in arms about it? How would you not be upset about this?
Absolutely. And look, Stars have always gotten some favorable calls from officials. We do know that. I'm a Michael Jordan fan, obviously, but I will certainly admit to him getting some favorable calls. I remember Patrick Ewing doing the hop, skip, and the jump in the All-Star game. That is an All-Star game, obviously, but sometimes they pocketed the whistle in regular season games as well. And I certainly remember the discourse around the 2006 finals, how suddenly the Heat were getting a lot of free throws. There was debate whether it was a direction, a change in officiating, whether the Heat were leaning into it, whether they decided, look, we're going to attack the basket and we're going to force them to make these calls. But that was the discourse around the 2006 finals. I absolutely remember that. And yes, they came back, won 4 straight, the first team, I believe, since the 1977 Blazers to win after going down 0-2. So it was significant. And the fact that there were all those free throws, yeah, there was definitely controversy with that series. And of course, Lakers versus Kings in the 2002 Western Conference Finals is one of the most infamous examples here. Now, I will say that there are other factors that are ignored in favour of the questionable calls. Going back to that Kings series, in the oral history that I read a few years back, a lot of Kings players did note that we missed free throws, we made mistakes here, we made some sloppy turnovers, we could have won that game, and the Pacers could have won Game 4. There were some missed free throws, there were some bad plays, even with the hand on the scales, even with that questionable officiating, that was a winnable game. Of course, that also gives the NBA and the officials some plausible deniability when they're not putting the hand too much on the scales. They're still leaving it up to the players, but
they're influencing the game. There's still the sketchy behavior.
That's right.
They're like that doesn't belong in the game.
Exactly.
Regardless if the free throws were missed or whatever, or if they could overcome it. I think there was Tim Donaghy that once stated, there was a bet he lost, or like there were bets that were lost at times because a player would make a shot. Right.
Sure.
A miraculous shot that they didn't expect to go in, that had a low percentage to go in. And I think he brought up Paul Pierce, actually.
Yeah.
I think he said something like Paul Pierce thwarted a bet in one game. Yeah. He didn't meet the spread. Like it ended up ruining the bet because Paul Pierce made an amazing shot. But that doesn't mean that the officials, it's okay that they were trying to influence the game.
Definitely not. In
that way. But at the same time, hearing stories like Paul Pierce doing that, right, and hearing stories about, we should have made those free throws, et cetera, does make me feel a little bit more at ease thinking that the players aren't in on it.
That's right, yeah.
And I think that's
not
important.
Like wrestling. It's not like pro wrestling
piece here.
Yeah.
Right. It's an important piece here because then you can still have a favorite player and you can still have players you like, right? Because that they're not out there, trying to rig games, et cetera. Do I think that it's possible that players have done it in the past? I'd be stupid not to, right? Anybody would be. Like, there's so much money in this game. Who knows? It's possible that some players have, been involved in this stuff. But at the end of the day, hearing that, Pierce didn't give a crap about a spread and just wanted to win the game, right? Like stuff like that. Like that's a big deal for me as a fan, knowing that, yeah, you know what? These players are out here. They're truly competing, et cetera. So I love that aspect of it. I also want to point out, Andrew, Tim Donaghy, the former NBA referee who bet on games he officiated, claimed he won 70 to 80% of his bets. The FBI confirmed that he won an incredible percentage, with one report specifying about 75%. His betting success, particularly in relation to point spreads, drew the attention of the mafia, according to ESPN. So think about how many games he was able to swing in his favor that decided standings, right?
Oh, yeah.
Where an NBA team ended up in the standings, whether they won the game that night. Stats that we look at on Basketball Reference, all of that stuff, the integrity of the game, right? So that's the stuff that absolutely is scary and drives me crazy. And that was during David Stern's tenure, right? And, we obviously like David Stern more than Adam Silver as far as commissioner.
Yeah.
And whatnot.
Wasn't perfect, though.
But it's worth noting that this was during that time. I wanted to point out a couple pieces from that ESPN article I mentioned. They stated he did well. By Donaghy's own admission in his memoir, so much cash started rolling in that he had problems knowing physically where to stash it, so his wife wouldn't start asking questions. In Sarasota, Kim Donaghy printed out for me the first 98 pages of her unfinished and unpublished memoir, The Ref's Wife. In it, she writes of the paradox of being both lonely for him and truly afraid of him. She describes the moment she picked up his official NBA jacket to put it in the wash and found in the pocket a huge wad of $100 bills rolled in a rubber band. How huge? With her thumbs and forefingers, she made a 0, the diameter of an orange. She struggled to recall exactly when, but she told me she probably started finding the cash in 2004 during the season. At the time, she told herself the money was from golf course betting. But she would keep finding such roles in the pockets as the years went on. When I asked, she said that she never counted the money, never confronted him about its existence. And she said it's because she was afraid. So he was deep in this. And I can only imagine what those conversations were with the bettors, with the gamblers, with the people that were involved, possibly with Scott Foster, right? Which is scary because he's still officiating and he didn't face discipline here. It's too bad we don't have audio from any of those calls, Andrew.
Yeah, for sure. And when organized crime is getting involved, well, that's not good, to say the least, to put it mildly. And you talk about the players not being in on it and that giving you a little bit of hope, and certainly gives me hope as well. And also the fact that there are a lot of finals that they could have rigged, especially if they wanted the bigger star to win and to make more money. 2007 finals could have manipulated that to have the Cavaliers at least win a few games or look better and have LeBron, win that first championship in 2007 and really crown him much earlier. 2011, not going against the Mavericks in those finals, despite seemingly going against them in 2006. 2014, giving the Spurs another ring in that rematch with the Heat and in quite convincing fashion. So that also gives me hope that whatever influence they have, it's not so much that when you do have two great teams in the finals, that people do want to see that they're not putting their hand on the scale as much, or it's simply not having an impact because the players are deciding it on the court. But yeah, there are a lot of fishy stories like that. And it really is a shame because this is a sport we love. We do want to believe that the league has integrity. We want to believe that when our teams won, Derek, that was legit, that we saw them win these big games and these championships, and that it was on the level. And we also hope that when it wasn't our favourite team, that those finals were on the level as well. We'd hate to think that any finals were rigged to that point, influenced to that point, that it was completely not on the level. Not just NBA finals, of course, the conference finals in 2002 being an infamous example, as I said. But yeah, it is really disheartening to find that out and find that there are a lot of games that are questionable. Like you say, go on Basketball Reference, you look at the results, you look at the stats, were these legit? I will say as a sidebar here, we did have a couple of clowns look into Michael Jordan's 1988 Defensive Player of the Year. We've talked about it before, I won't get right into it again because, frankly, that nonsense doesn't deserve a lot of our breath. But it's funny how they look into that, but not this really big scandal about fixed games. That seems like a bigger deal than maybe MJ was credited for a couple of extra steals when he won Defensive Player of the Year. I think a rigged finals would be a much bigger story, something to look into. Really great journalism there.
I hate that stuff anyway because you can see how stats are padded in today's NBA constantly, right?
But it's just funny that
there was videos shown of LeBron's assists one game. I think they credited him for 10 or 11, and it looked like probably 6 or 7 shouldn't have been counted as assists, where he threw it to the wing. And well, I mean, that is not just happening. That's BS stat keeping.
Sure.
Right. And I think that that's gone on, more recently actually than it did in the past. But, he'd pass it to the wing and the guy would catch the ball and he would go into a one-on-one move, go dribble between the legs, make his drive, do a spin move and then score. And they gave LeBron an assist for that. Even though the direct definition of an assist is a pass that leads directly to a score, right?
Exactly.
Like the guy's not supposed to go into a post move. He's not supposed to go into a one-on-one move. So I don't want to hear about the BS about how statisticians are counting these stats because there's obvious favoritism.
Oh, for sure.
And I feel like that is going on even more today than it did in the past, but I'm sure it's been happening for a very, very long time.
Oh, undoubtedly. And I can certainly admit that. But again, to that point, that is not as big of a deal as potentially rigging a finals or rigging a series. And again, if you are this investigative journalist, if you're not just a mouthpiece for a certain player, well, there's your answer, I suppose, Derek. But if you're not just that, then those are the kinds of things you'd want to look into. Those are the kinds of things you want to expose as a supposed journalist and analyst and whatever, as a gatekeeper of integrity in the NBA history, which they absolutely aren't. But it's just funny that they're looking at that stuff. And we know why, obviously, but it's funny that they're looking at that stuff rather than something like this, because this is a much bigger deal than, MJ's stats were slightly inflated, LeBron's stats were slightly inflated, maybe John Stockton got a couple of extra assists too here and there, whatever. I suppose that's a talking point, but a rigged series, a rigged finals, rigged games, officiating, that's a story.
It got you talking, though, didn't it?
Yeah.
The Jordan piece got you talking.
Yeah.
Yeah. So let's remember that that's the biggest thing, right? It's supposed to get clicks. It's supposed to get you talking. It's supposed to get you up in arms. It's supposed to get you, basically either taking a side or lashing out or having some strong opinion in one way or another. So it worked, unfortunately. Yeah. So, and it gets the best of us, right? And that's how media works, and influence works.
Before we go on, a reminder that the NLSC podcast comes out every week on the NLSC, NBA-live.com, as well as our YouTube channel. We're also on Spotify, Apple Podcasts, and other podcast apps. If you're listening on any of those apps, we'd greatly appreciate a review. To keep up with the show and everything we're doing with basketball gaming in general, connect with us on social media. On Twitter and Facebook, we are the NLSC. We also have an Instagram, NLSC Basketball, and on YouTube, we're youtube.com/NBA Live Series Center. Once again, visit us at NBA-live.com, where in addition to the podcast, you'll also find all of our original content, as well as our forum and modding community.
So I also want to point out, we can go back to the, 2000 Western Conference Finals, Lakers, Blazers, right? You can go to the 2012 NBA Finals. A lot of sketchy stuff there. Like, there's many different finals. We're not pinpointing one player or one team. We're talking about series, right? We're talking about, series impacted by heavy officiating, by questionable calls, etc. So I want to get to a few more points on this article that I found interesting. So, quote, from 2003 to 2007, any game he reffed, we had a wager on, a member of the Animals gambling syndicate stated. He said he liked to call an illegal defense call right away in the first minute. That way, the gambler said, Donaghy could force the side he'd picked against to play a little less aggressively on defense. He said he'd pick on the big center or the most valuable player of each team, and he'd try to get them in foul trouble. And we've seen that before, right? There was a game, I want to say it was in the 2016 NBA Finals, where we saw Steph Curry get like 2 really quick fouls in like the first quarter, and he had to be benched. And again, do I think this stuff ended with Tim Donaghy? No. Do I think that situation that I'm talking about with Steph Curry is 100% due to gambling or due to league action, all of that stuff? I don't know. But these are the things that you question as a fan, right? As somebody who likes to watch true competition. Why were these 2 ticky-tack calls made on a superstar in the NBA Finals with all the other stuff that's going on the basketball court? The gambler added, he also told me that they were betting millions and he was an idiot to not ask for more. And as I stated earlier, Tim Donaghy stated that he could influence an NBA game by 6 points either way. So, yeah, you got to question that stuff when you see these questionable calls on the court, or the questionable non-calls, like people were pointing out with SGA pushing off constantly, getting away with traveling, Lou Dort and Alex Caruso being allowed to push, pull, do things that they normally wouldn't be allowed to do.
Definitely. And that's how you do it. Those subtle calls that people can just say, well, that's kind of a normal call, or that's within the bounds of NBA rules. And of course, you can see the logic there. If you do make those calls early on in the game, the rest of us think, oh, that's just how they're calling this game. They're calling this game a bit tighter. So players are going to have to adjust to that. Players are going to have to be careful. They're calling this a bit tighter. They're not letting anything go, or conversely, they're pocketing the whistle. So that is something to take advantage of. So it does set up the narrative for the game.
Yeah. Barstool Sports, and this is a big deal when Barstool Sports, sites with huge followings, you have some of the biggest influencers in the sport questioning what's going on, during the live game or after, etc. They posted, Scott Foster in the first half, 2 flagrant reviews, countless minutes at the replay booth, 30 total free throws, and they ended the tweet with the extender. That is terrible for the sport, Andrew. These posts from these sites, they get millions and millions of videos. You notice in that post, it said nothing about a great shot that was made, right? A great play, an awesome and one, a great defensive play, two teams battling to get the NBA championship, et cetera. Like, that's what people are posting about and talking about. It is terrible for the game. It was the same type of thing that I talked about with Angel Reese and Caitlin Clark and the media turning that into a race war. Instead of talking about the amazing performances by Caitlin Clark, instead of talking about how, she's a great up and coming player, instead of talking about the other amazing players in the WNBA and whatnot, and what they were doing in those performances they were putting up. 99% of the coverage that you saw was Angel Reese versus Caitlin Clark, and Indiana Fever fans are somehow racist, or vice versa, Chicago Sky fans, all of that stuff. And it's like, we're not even talking about the on-court product. We're not even talking about the basketball here. No. And it's a basketball league. It's supposed to be focused on the great players and teams and the between-the-line action, and it drives me absolutely nuts.
You're right. It absolutely becomes a talking point. And it's funny, we talk about contrived and rigged and as fake as professional wrestling and whatever, and there's a trope with commentary in professional wrestling where when it's obvious that a move didn't connect, especially a punch or a kick or whatever, the commentator will say, oh, a glancing blow, or didn't get all of that one, but just enough, when the wrestler who has been quote-unquote hit still sells it, but clearly it wasn't as snug as it needed to be, and it's quite clearly fake and contrived. And in the waning seconds of Game 4, there were fouls before the inbound on the Pacers, twice, which you don't see very often, and Mike Breen actually mentioned that. He called it out and said, oh, we don't see that call very often. And it was almost like pro wrestling style acknowledging the situation but trying to cover it up, trying to sell the story as they do with professional wrestling and commentary. So it's always funny when the commentators, or in this case, the pundits, etc., after the game, comment like that. And it is a shame that becomes part of the discourse, but it's one of those things that if you are covering basketball, if you are covering sports, you kind of have to acknowledge.
I think the thing that bothers me, though, is it's very clear that they have to keep their mouths shut about it, about that piece. Like, that they can't really be like, well, Scott Foster is, negatively impacting this game or taking over this game. One thing that I appreciated actually about Tom Heinsohn, and people kind of got on him about it, but when he was commenting, for the Celtics all those years, is he would call out the officials. And sometimes even when the officials were going against the team unnaturally that was playing against the Celtics, but he would literally state, you're taking over the game. The refs are taking over this one. They must have to meet a spread. Like, he would say things like that. And it was kind of refreshing to see Tom Heinsohn kind of tell it like it is and be honest a lot of times on these broadcasts.
Oh, for sure. And it's probably why Jeff Van Gundy was given the boot as well, because sometimes I think he'd be a little bit too honest. And, of course, there were other controversies, I suppose, or not everybody liked Jeff Van Gundy's style, and sometimes he did go off on weird tangents and whatever, which was sometimes entertaining, sometimes annoying, but he did have a tendency to be honest about that kind of thing, and it's probably one of the reasons that ESPN gave him the boot and replaced him with people who will toe the line. And going back to Kendrick Perkins, he is somebody who is willing to be in that system. He is willing to be the guy that throws out hot takes and participates in that performative debate, that contrived debate. So I think it's a case of people with too much integrity don't want to be a part of it, but certainly if they do have integrity and they try to bring that to the broadcast, they're going to get replaced by people who are going to play ball.
Exactly. They need people that are going to play the game. So the last piece I wanted to mention related to Tim Donaghy. There was a Bleacher Report article that came out in 2017 that states, disgraced former ref Tim Donaghy says Mavericks were screwed out of 2006 title. And it goes on to say, quote, basically, Dallas was up in the series, end quote, Donaghy said on the Forgotten Mavericks podcast. With that being said, the way it was back then was that the NBA would come in order to extend a series, to go over plays that they felt should have went in Miami's favor that didn't, and that went in Dallas's favor that shouldn't have. And they started to program and train the referees to look for certain things. He goes on to say, I think basically Dallas got screwed out of a championship in that situation because the NBA started to manipulate the series to make sure it was extended and Dallas could never recover from it. He goes on to say, let's not forget at the time, Ed Rush was the supervisor of officials, Donaghy said, and he hated Mark Cuban's guts. He absolutely hated Mark Cuban. He's programming and training these referees to look for certain things that definitely put Miami at an advantage. Ed Rush used to tell us that Mark Cuban was someone that created a lot of extra work for us, constantly calling the league office, and that really just got everyone to start to dislike Mark Cuban. And then it goes on to say, Cuban once famously said he would not hire Ed Rush to manage a Dairy Queen, which Cuban later did for a day following public outcry about the comment, which is interesting. I'd love to see footage of that. But I've gone back and I've watched that series, and there's a lot of questionable stuff that happens in that 2006 NBA Finals in those final 4 games. So, that wouldn't surprise me at all.
And, I can totally believe that because playing in the local league, and yes, my local league here in Australia is not the NBA, obviously, but there were referees that definitely took a dislike to our team, to my coach, because he would ask about calls, especially ones that were very strange or he just wanted some clarification on, and that did bruise their egos. So there were definitely a couple of referees that when we saw them listed on the board, we rolled our eyes because we knew it was going to be rough. And admittedly, a lot of them were kids refereeing other kids' games, but that definitely did go on with bruised egos and so forth.
Yeah, I think that there's also a lot of referees out there that want to be bigger than the game, that
Agreed.
They want the focus on them.
Yeah.
And I think that can absolutely shift a game. I think that if you have a referee that has main character syndrome, that somebody who wants to be the main character all the time, and they want the drama focused on them, all of that stuff, they want the people to be talking about them, then I think that those refs can sometimes be the worst. And I've had those refs in my local leagues as well, and they're patched refs. They do high school and college games, right? Oftentimes, and what it is when we see them about to ref a game, it's like they don't like me, right? They don't like somebody on my team. They are going to pull for the other team, and we know that we're in for a long night. And that's sad because they're officials. They're not supposed to be impacting the outcome like that. So lastly, Andrew, I think that it's a big business. I think that there's a lot of influence involved. I think there's social engineering involved. I think that there's so much money in it and influence in it that it would not surprise me if this was still going on, right? It would not surprise me if Tim Donaghy didn't act alone. It would not surprise me to find out that the league did send down direction in order to, shift games one way or another, shift series one way or another. It wouldn't surprise me if Scott Foster was involved in that scandal. There's a lot of evidence that points to, the fact that he might be, including the phone calls that I mentioned, the suspicious, acts on his part in relation to that. So, I'm between yellow and red, but the thing that keeps me kind of, still being a fan of the NBA, especially the history of the NBA, is the fact that the NBA players themselves appear to, be trying their hardest, right? Appear to be trying to compete at the highest level, et cetera. So that still keeps me a fan.
Absolutely. And for my part, like I said, somewhere between yellow and green, in so much as I don't like to throw the word rigged around. That is a big word to throw out there, but there is no denying that obviously there is some things going on behind the scenes where there's smoke, there's fire, and all of that stuff. And it certainly seems that there's influence going on in these games, and there are results that are questionable. And it does make you wonder about how deep does it go? What else is not on the level? I would like to think that for the most part, the league is on the level and that the play ultimately decides the outcome, that the players on the floor are the ones deciding the outcomes and overcoming officiating at the end of the day. But clearly there are some highly questionable calls, and I say that these are the things that the league should be looking at. Of course, if the league is handing down these edicts and telling the referees to put their hand on the scales and telling the referees to make these calls and extend series and so forth, well, the league is not going to investigate itself. It's obviously that is the purpose. That is what they are trying to do. But if they want to improve the game, if they want to clean up their image, if they want to avoid this talk and this speculation and this distrust of the integrity of the game, then that is what they need to be cleaning up, not changing jersey nomenclature and all other kinds of formats and talking about 4-point lines and other changes to the game. No, you need transparency with the officiating. You need to have integrity with the officiating and the competition and so forth. That is how you improve the league, not any of that other stuff. And look, clearly there is some stuff going on. It's very easy to say, oh, Tim Donaghy is untrustworthy or whatever, but he is admitting to this stuff. There are those records of the phone calls. There are those questionable calls that we can go back and see. So yeah, it's always disappointing to see this evidence that a sport that we love and a league that we enjoy is compromised. But yeah, it's something I think the league does need to address. More transparency for the officials, more integrity with the officiating, and yeah, letting the players decide the results.
Yeah, I'll just say this. Trust your eyes. Like, if something looks off, if something looks like out of whack, all of that stuff, it is okay to question it. And I think that's what social media did in this case, with game 4, the predictions before, once they realized Scott Foster was reffing, the questionable calls like that you mentioned in the fourth quarter, especially even before the ball was inbounded, stuff like that. Like, trust your eyes. It's okay to question this stuff. And I'm glad that people are shining a light on it. I do find, however, like I stated earlier in the show, it is sad. It's sad that we're not talking about great performances, great playoff moments. The only performances we're talking about are from the refs and Stephen A. Smith, right? That's sad. I do want to point out before we get to the community's responses to that community question, I thought you would appreciate this. Stephen A. Smith said, "Yep, that's me. Who would have thought I can multitask, especially during timeouts? Hope you all are enjoying the NBA Finals. This is going 7 games now, peeps." And that was in response to somebody posting the video of him playing solitaire during Game 4 of the NBA Finals. And one of the responses was, "Most employees get fired for playing solitaire on the job. The details during timeouts, players, coaches, etc. is insightful. You are famous for lambasting elite professionals who fail in big moments. This is the NBA Finals, and you didn't do your job." Yeah, I mean, listen to the way Stephen A. Smith talks, right? He's an excellent puppet for the media, for this NBA coverage and all of that stuff and all of his hot takes, right? He's great for it. But video being shown of him playing a game on his phone during timeouts, and then proof that he also had it up on a screen during the actual live game, and then he's going to lecture you on basketball the next day, and he's getting paid millions to be there. Yeah, that pissed a lot of people off, to be honest with you. Like, there was quite the outcry on social media about seeing him do this during an NBA Finals game he was supposed to be covering. So I thought you would appreciate that.
Yeah, that is good. Absolutely. And I will say, of course, that he is really good at speaking his mind and calling out players and, really going after players, but not so good about taking on criticism or being called out himself. That is certainly hypocritical. And yeah, that call out is absolutely correct. And I've told the story before, but I do love telling it, that when they took us to the 2007 draft at the NBA Live 08 community event in New York, and that was such a great experience, but we were a row in front of the guys that were heckling Stephen A. Smith, and you can go on YouTube and see him being heckled about his cheese doodles and, quite frankly, and everything else. We were right in front of those guys, so we saw him looking in our direction and bantering with them.
So getting to the community responses, again, the question was, with officiating being the NBA Finals hot topic, we want to know, do you believe the NBA is rigged? Red, it's an entertainment business that is about profit and influence. It's rigged. Yellow, I don't know. Or green, the NBA is not rigged at all. The players and teams decide the outcome. So we'll go to Twitter first. T Gentry at Bucky T states red. "Oh, I absolutely always felt that it's rigged, especially with certain games and at times very predictable outcomes. As a viewer, this is big business, man, to keep you entertained." And yeah, I agree with that. I think that there are big games that look rigged. And we've talked about several of them on the show today, and I just think there's so much money involved, so much influence. It's such a big business. It's hard to believe that the outcomes are natural and organic all the time, and that it doesn't matter if a series gets to extended. It doesn't matter what 2 teams are playing at the time, etc. So yeah, I agree there, Andrew.
Yeah, it's hard not to feel cynical. Absolutely.
Roger Ward, Live 01 legend, states, it's almost definitively been rigged in the past, early 2000s, but I don't believe it is anymore. Star players still get favorable calls like they always have, and some nights refs suck, just like every other sport. And yeah, I mean, I'm going to disagree with the belief that it doesn't happen anymore. I think that it's very possible that it indeed does. But where I'm going to agree with him is that star players definitely get favorable calls, and they definitely have gotten favorable calls in the past, and that's going back decades, right? So he is absolutely right in that regard, and that is an unfortunate part of professional sports. Sometimes that's just the case.
Well, it certainly happens whenever they bring in the zero tolerance policy regarding technicals, because I've seen star players slapping their arms, demanding foul calls, and barking at the referees and really getting in their face and not getting technicals. Meanwhile, you've got some role player kind of rolls their eyes or shrugs and is more just reacting to their own mistake than criticizing the call, but they can't chop their hands in a tee quick enough after the role player does that. But they're letting the star players get really petulant after calls and really demonstrative with their objection to the calls. So yeah, that bias is there, and it has been there for a long time. And like I said, rigged is a very strong word and a loaded word, and it depends what you mean by rigged. But if it's about putting the hand on the scale, yeah, that's still happening today.
Stephen at the Live King states, get Scott Foster out of my sight. Dude is an embarrassment to the sport. NBA has gone away from quality and is more about WWE style entertainment. They definitely want more games for more revenue. Yeah, it's hard for me to take this NBA product seriously. I think it's become less and less about basketball, less and less about true competition, less and less spotlighting the players' skills and abilities on the court, the rivalries, etc., and more about what is this player wearing before the game, right? What is he, what were his comments after the game that you didn't even really care about, like between the lines, what is his social media brand? What is he talking about on social media? Who does he support? All of that stuff. More politics involved, more just less and less about the actual quality of the on-court product and more about all of that BS. And that's unfortunate for true basketball fans.
And of course, Stephen, a huge Pacers fan, so absolutely understand his frustration. I saw his comments after the game as well, rightfully miffed at those questionable calls and lack of calls, as the case may be. And jumping over to Facebook for a few more responses, Kevin says, been a Trailblazer fan my whole life. Back when they were in the finals against the Bulls in 1992, everyone talked about how they couldn't win if certain refs were involved. Sure enough, part way into a game, then technicals started flying. I knew it was rigged at that point. My older brothers called it a judged exhibition like boxing. After Stern so vehemently denied the accusations of that disgraced ref in the 2000s, that is Tim Donaghy, of course, I thought, methinks thou does protest too much. Bit of Shakespeare there. Yeah, I love basketball, but the NBA seems pretty rigged at this point. And yeah, it is difficult to not let that cynicism come in when you do see questionable calls. Yeah.
I just hope the players aren't involved. I'll say it again. There's no way for us to prove that. I mean, we've looked at, Terry Rozier, some obviously questionable performances and, him being investigated for potentially fixing games and whatnot. Just some super questionable shot selection, some of the worst bricks you've ever seen, some terrible turnovers that just don't look natural for any level of basketball, but especially for professionals. So I really hope that players aren't involved in, fixing outcomes, et cetera. But I wouldn't be surprised if a news story broke, right, tomorrow and stated that there were certain players under investigation, certain teams, et cetera. But I don't know. I just think it's such a big business. I just think there's so much influence in it that even if something like that may be going on or could be going on, that we may never hear about it. So, yeah, it's crazy. But I try to take a common sense approach with everything. And, for now, I'm still a fan of NBA basketball, obviously not as much today, but I am a fan of many players and teams, from the past and whatnot. And I don't believe that those teams and players that I'm a fan of, were involved in, fixing outcomes. And I hope I never learn that they were.
Kieran says, I'm somewhere between yellow and red, but closer to red. The Lakers' free throw disparity tells us all we need to know about this. And of course, free throw disparity is a hot topic as well, especially when it does look fishy. And sometimes it is a case of one team is being more aggressive and taking it inside and drawing the fouls. And the numbers alone don't tell the whole story. You do need to watch the games. That being said, the numbers sometimes definitely are fishy, and you do see a team that needs to make a run, whether it's over the course of a few weeks to make the playoffs or get a higher seed, or certainly within a single game that is going to change the course of a series, when they suddenly start getting a lot of free throws like that, putting the other team in foul trouble and getting those freebies at the line, yeah, you do question it.
Yeah, hard not to, right? And there's been evidence that shows, too, that the free throws can look similar, like the free throw attempts for both teams, but that the swing happened late in the fourth quarter, right? Like that's when they realized they needed to turn on the fix machine or whatever the hell you want to call it, and start favoring one team. And that was pointed out with this game 4 of the NBA Finals, where it just seemed that everything went against the Pacers in the fourth quarter. And I saw some of the footage of the stuff that were, the non-calls and the calls and all of that stuff. And yeah, that's super sketchy to me, to be honest with you.
M says, after Michael Jordan era, I believe it's rigged. Not sure if he's talking about after the MJ era or as of the MJ era, that he believes that it's been rigged since then. Either way, does believe that it's rigged. Titus Peter says yellow, but after Doncic trade and number 1 draft pick, tend to think red, so rigged. And yeah, the draft is also a factor here, Derek. A lot of people feeling that the results are kind of convenient at times, and the Doncic trade certainly did raise eyebrows that only the Lakers were involved, and you are delivering this generational player to the Lakers, and also to play with LeBron in his final years in the league as he hopes to chase another ring. Yeah, it did definitely get people questioning things.
Yeah, and obviously this goes back to even the mid-'80s, where David Stern kind of looked to intentionally fold the end of the envelope for Patrick Ewing to be drafted by the Knicks, right? And that story has actually resurfaced quite a few times over the last few years, where it's questionable if David Stern rigged the draft for the Knicks to get Patrick Ewing. And the Cavs getting so many high picks in a short period of time with such low odds. There was a 1.8% chance that the Mavericks would get the number 1 pick this year, and somehow they got it. And this is right after they handed, Luka Doncic to the Lakers. That is questionable. That is sketchy. I don't blame people for questioning the league's involvement in those two situations and whatnot. So again, big business, big influence. The NBA is going to NBA, right? So yeah, a lot of sketchy stuff.
New Orleans loses Chris Paul, and then they get Anthony Davis with the number 1 pick. The Bulls got Derrick Rose with very low odds in 2008. Hometown hero, obviously. So, I obviously love the Derrick Rose era. But yeah, I can't say for sure that there wasn't some kind of chicanery. Gilbert says yellow. John says business, so they agree that there is certainly something going on there. And finally, Glenn says green. I don't believe it's rigged, but certain teams adjust to the officiating better, which can be at times wildly different, depending on the crew. And that is a point that has been raised before, that different referees and crews officiate a certain way and that teams are adjusting to it. So I do see that point of view. But again, Derek, there is that lingering skepticism for me.
Yeah, I agree. I don't. He's entitled to his opinion. I don't agree with that take, because it doesn't explain the ticky-tack fouls that are called on one side and then the no calls on the other side for much more physical behavior. Like, that wouldn't explain that at all. So, and we have seen that countless times, especially in big games or series extending games, etc. So, but yeah, thank you to the community for your responses. Definitely had quite a few. Again, we love basketball. We love true competition. And that's why we love sports, right? So we hope that every game we watch is, there's a group of players out there that are trying their hardest, and that the league, is whatever league they're playing in, it's being officiated fairly, etc. But yeah, there's reason for concern.
Sometimes you think that NBA officials should be officiating WWE matches, and maybe some WWE referees could be doing a better job calling the NBA. Just putting it out there. Certainly if I want to watch a rigged and contrived sport, a simulated sport, I will watch professional wrestling. Not basketball, I want that to be on the level. With that being said, that has brought us to the end of this week's show. As always, thank you for tuning in, and please join us again next week, and every week, on the NLSC, nb-live.com, our YouTube channel, or wherever you listen to podcasts. In the meantime, make sure you're following us on social media. That's where you can get in touch with us, and of course, stay up to date with all of our content. So Derek, go ahead and plug the handles.
Yeah, you can reach me on X, formerly known as Twitter, at D43G and at D4384. I'm also on YouTube, D43, and on the NLSC, D43.
As for me, I'm Andrew in the forum and Andrew NLSC on X and Blue Sky. The NLSC is on X, Facebook, and Blue Sky at the NLSC. We're also NLSC Basketball on Instagram and Threads. We're on YouTube at NBA Live Series Center. And of course, keep a look to the NLSC itself, nba-live.com, for everything we do for basketball video games. So, thank you once again for tuning in, and until next time, I'm Andrew.
And I'm Derek.
Go get buckets, everyone.